Hello, and welcome to the Community IT Innovators Technology Topics Podcast, where we discuss nonprofit technology, cybersecurity, tech project implementation, strategic planning, and nonprofit IT careers. Find us at communityit.com. Thank you for joining Community IT for this podcast, Part 1. Subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts and leave us a rating to help others find this leadership resource for nonprofits. Listen for Part 2 in your podcast feed.
Welcome, everyone, to the Community IT Innovators webinar on Google Workspace for nonprofits. It used to be pretty rare that we saw growing or mid-sized nonprofits using Google Workspace at the organizational level, but it's growing more and more common. And so today we'd like to share some insights with you on how you can use it, especially how to use the shared drive feature, which is a little new and a little tricky, but very useful. So our learning objectives this session are that after the session, you should be able to describe Google Workspace and its tools and identify advantages to nonprofits using Google Workspace, describe the different approaches of Google Workspace and Office 365 as nonprofit IT platforms and some of the pros and cons of each. We won't have time to get into all of the pros and cons, but we'll touch on some of the main ones. And understand Google shared drives for nonprofits and how they are different from Google Drive. So please stay to the end and take the survey after the webinar, which helps us improve. And one person drawn at random will win a $25 gift certificate. So if that's an incentive. I want to remind everyone today that Community IT is vendor agnostic. So this presentation is to discuss how nonprofits are using these tools and what we are observing about them. But we aren't recommending any platform in general. We only make recommendations to our clients based on specific business needs and nonprofit culture. So we encourage you to submit questions and comments through the chat today. We probably won't be able to get to everything, but you can always contact us after the webinar for follow-up. And our presenter, Steve, has also written a couple of articles on Google Workspace that you can find on our website, and I will post those links in the chat in a minute if you haven't seen them yet. This webinar is being recorded, and I'll post the video, podcast, and transcript on our site within a week, so don't worry too much about taking notes. My name is Carolyn Woodard. I'm Marketing Director at Community IT, and I'll be monitoring the Q&A in the chat and helping Steve with his presentation today. And I've already learned a lot about Google Workspace and shared drive, so I'm looking forward to sharing that with you. So Steve, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Steve Longenecker. I'm the Director of IT Consulting at Community IT. I've been at Community IT for almost 18 years. Just last weekend, my son graduated from high school, and when I was hired at Community IT, I asked if I could possibly start a week or two later than we were planning on, because he had just been born and I wanted to spend a little bit more time at home with him. So that's how I remember how long I've been at Community IT. I'm pleased to be with you today and share with you about Google Workspace.
That's great. I do remember that. So before we begin, if you're not familiar with Community IT, a little bit about us. We are a 100% employee-owned managed services provider, and we provide outsourced IT support. We work exclusively with nonprofit organizations, and our mission is to help nonprofits accomplish their missions through the effective use of technology. We serve nonprofits across the United States, and we've been doing this for over 20 years. We are technology experts and are consistently given an MSP 501 recognition for being a top MSP, which is an honor that we received again in 2021. So now we are going to do a little interaction to get things going. In the pre-webinar questions, a lot of you indicated that you're already using Google Workspace. So I'm going to launch a poll. There we go. In the poll, you will be asked if you use your nonprofit uses Google all the time, if you are thinking of changing to Google Workspace, if you started with Google but left it for another platform, if you use a hybrid, you use Google for some things, Office 365 or something else for other things, or if this entire question is not applicable and you're here in the webinar for some other reason. So Steve, would you like to tell us what people responded to?
Sure. So I have to look at my other screen for that. So everyone who sees my face will see me looking away. So 15% said that they're on all Google all the time nonprofit. Another 15% said they're thinking of changing to Google Workspace. Just a very few, just one of the participants, 3%, said that they would started with Google but left it for another platform. And then over half, 63%, said that they use a hybrid, Google for some things, Office 365 for others, best of breed, whatever. And then 5% said it's not an applicable question to them.
Excellent. So that's kind of a whopping group of our attendees who are using it as a hybrid. So we'll talk a little bit more about that later. Yeah. And stay tuned because our webinar next month is all about that. So to start out, we're going to do some definitions. So Steve, what is Google Workspace and what tools does that include?
So it's a suite of services. They're often described as your basic productivity suite of services. This is Microsoft 365 is the other major player in that field. We can see here on this slide that there's a lot of classic tools that people are familiar with. Gmail is the first and foremost of that. Calendar apps are a calendar app. Document editing and document storage, which is Drive, Forms, a meeting space comparable to Zoom, comparable to Microsoft Teams, and a bit more than that. We also have on this slide analytics, Google Analytics, and Google and YouTube, which is a company owned by Alphabet, the owner of Google. It used to be Google, and now the corporate is called Alphabet. They aren't part of Google Workspace, but we threw them up here just because certainly any nonprofit that is doing anything with the web would want to have be using analytics to find out how their web traffic is doing. And then YouTube, of course, everyone's familiar with that. And there's a lot of YouTube opportunities for nonprofits that you should explore separate from Google Workspace. But since it's owned by Google, I just threw their little icons on this slide. So that's what Google Workspace is. It's a suite of services. They're cloud services, and you use them to do sort of the basics, the things that sort of keep the lifeblood of your organization in terms of IT. There's other stuff that you do, but email, calendaring, document sharing, that stuff is like everyday operational work, and that's what Google Workspace does for you.
So I know that we have some clients and maybe some folks in our network and community, maybe some people on this webinar who are skeptical of Google Workspace, and especially whether it appears professional enough for a grown-up nonprofit. There may be some nonprofits who started out small and use the tools that are free to nonprofits, but then as they grow, they might be afraid that Google tools convey maybe an image that they are not as serious, or maybe still pretty new. They're not using an official suite of tools. So can you talk a little bit about the ways the professional Google Workspace that we recommend and that nonprofits and even some companies are using is different from the free tools that maybe we're all familiar with?
Sure. It is worth just talking about the fact that because Google, first and foremost, Google is an advertising company. So they make their money by providing a tremendously wonderful and effective search service, free to everyone. And for using it, they track what you search for, keep track of you as the searcher, and throw ads in your way on either in your search results or in other Google. You have a personal Gmail account, and as you're using it, you see these ads for things that you searched for last week, and you're like, that's just crazy. How do they know that I'm interested in getting a new air conditioner or whatever? And it's like, yeah, because you searched for air conditioners and you were logged into Gmail at the same time and so forth. That's what makes Google the bulk of its money. Google Workspace is somewhat carved out from that. So there's definitely an evolution or an evolutionary path from Gmail to the Workspace Gmail. And, it's the same product more or less, but Workspace Gmail is free of ads. They don't track you in the same way. They're not trying to make money off of you with advertising. It's much more separated and secure. And, it's definitely not part of that other paradigm. It's the same platform essentially. So whatever has been working, whatever they did in terms of designing for their consumer audience, which is much larger, that design carries over into the workspace, but it's a different thing. And you don't have a gmail.com address. You would have, whatever nonprofit.org address is. So it doesn't come across as I think it's just, it's the proof or whatever is in the customers. And I'm just going to go ahead and go to the next slide here. There are a lot of corporate workspace, Google Workspace customers who are clearly, they are there. And we have plenty of nonprofit organizations, some of whom I would consider fairly button up, that are not, hand to mouth nonprofits. Not that we don't love our hand to mouth nonprofits, but that are not hurting for money. They choose Google Workspace. They are very professional. They have very professional and high opinions of the work that they do, and they would not do it if they didn't think it came across that way. And certainly this list of customers right here, and the fact that Google has so many workspace customers, not just small businesses, but large corporations as well, using Google Workspace. So I think it's professional. It's different. And we'll talk about this in a future slide. Probably the biggest headache is some of the calendaring stuff can sometimes get kind of messy when someone sends you an email, someone emails you an invitation from their calendar and Outlook with Microsoft 365 on the back end. It comes to you in your Google Workspace mail, Gmail essentially. You can accept it. When you accept it, it goes onto your calendar. All that works great. But some of the wrinkles that are pretty seamless if you're on the same platform, like if they cancel, it doesn't automatically go away from your calendar. You have to get another. It's a little bit less clean.
I've definitely had that happen.
And vice versa. If you're emailing, a calendar, it's just a little bit less clean. But I think that's on the side. I don't think it affects, in my opinion, it doesn't seem like it affects people's opinions about whether or not it's professional, because there's just too many people that are doing it. It's well, how can it be unprofessional if all these professional customers are using it? So that's my take on that.
Totally. I'm going to jump in for 2 seconds and just, if you want to go back to the previous slide.
Sure.
We had one question that I think we could answer now, and then I'm going to save. There's a couple more questions coming in, but we have time for questions at the end. So I'm going to try to save them and ask you then.
Sure.
But we did have a question about security. So I was kind of just between this slide and the slide you just showed us of all of the companies that are using it.
Right.
Can you address
speak to security? Sure. I mean, I would say that, and we'll talk about the fact that Microsoft 365, which is really the single point of comparison to Google Workspace, those are the two choices for this stuff, for email, document sharing. Actually, document sharing has a number of other players. Dropbox and Box come to mind, but for email, calendar, those two things especially, it's pretty much Google Workspace. There are other players. I'm not, if someone's chatting, well, what about whatever? Yeah, there are other options, but those are the two.
Security in general.
But in terms of security, compared to Microsoft 365, what Google Workspace doesn't really have is quite the seamless integration in terms of using that platform to also secure your Windows devices, because Google doesn't really mess around with Windows devices. I mean, they have some security features in it, but they don't have that. So with Microsoft 365, you get some additional sort of built into the platform. You get some additional security stuff that has to do with artificial intelligence and stuff like that, and that can be helpful. That said, I would say that Google Workspace is definitely secure enough, and maybe I'll steal something from our CTO and the guy who does all of this sort of security consulting for us, Matt Eshelman, who's done multiple webinars for over this series, and you've probably heard him speak. Any platform can be made insecure, and I think that's more probably the risk is, do you have multi-factor authentication enabled? Are you training your end users on good security practices and having that training reinforced with phishing tests? and on all that kind of stuff. And if you're doing those things, Google Workspace is going to be plenty secure. And if you're not doing those things, it doesn't really matter whether your platform is security conscious or not. You're the one creating the holes. And when I say you, I mean your organization, or you as the gatekeeper for IT security at your organization. So I don't think Google Workspace is insecure. It's true that if you have a Windows world, if you're living in a Windows world, there are some advantages to being in Microsoft 365 in terms of security that goes up and down the stack. But Google secures the services that they deliver fine. You would just probably need some other products sliding in there to sort of manage security of devices if you were using Google Workspace, and possibly that other product would be Microsoft 365 and sort of a hybrid thing, which we'll talk about later. Does that make sense to you, Carolyn? And
yeah, no,
by extension to our audience.
A good answer to that question.
Okay, so we'll slip past this slide then, and we'll go to this.
Yeah. So, I was thinking when we looked at the big the corporations that are using Google, I can't imagine that the platform that they're using is particularly cheap.
Right.
But when we look at the plans and pricing, I know a lot of people are going to look at that as $0 per user per month for the Google Workspace for nonprofits. But is there a catch to that? And can you talk a little bit about, when you know that you need to move up to some of these higher?
There's not a catch per se. Well, the catch, I guess, is that you can see there that third bullet point or check box point or whatever it is, check mark, that it comes with 30 gigabytes of cloud storage per user. And in this day and age, that's not a lot of storage. And we definitely see clients that are struggling to sort of stay in this tier. And we're kind of like saying, hey, you shouldn't think of this tier as the tier you get to stay in. Like, this is kind of the starter tier. So if you're like starting a nonprofit and it's just you and, a partner or two, that tier, especially since when you're starting a nonprofit, you really have to be attentive to costs. You're probably running at a deficit until you get some grants in and get some sort of momentum. And so that can be really attractive. And it's similar to Microsoft 365 in that way as well. Microsoft 365, there are free tiers, but really at some point we're like, hey, you need to spend a little bit of money. The rest of these prices, we would say that for the majority of our clients, the business standard is more than adequate, and it's what we would want you to sort of think of as your tier. There is an add-on that's not on this list that's called Google Identity Premium or something like that. That's $6 per month, and I don't actually have any clients on it, but it provides some features. We don't have any clients on, I should say, but it provides some features that we're interested in terms of that security stuff that we were talking about before. But I think this business standard at $3 per user per month, you can see that you get 2 terabytes of cloud storage per user as compared to 30 gigabytes. So,
that's a big difference.
An order of magnitude difference. Yeah.
We had a question come in from chat. Are these specifically nonprofit?
These are the nonprofit. So this is the nonprofit. This is a website that if you look for Google for nonprofits, this will turn up. And I should have put the URL in here. But this web page turns up and it's like the compare plans, link, and it will show you this. All of these prices are more or less 75% off, which is more or less what Microsoft does. So it's so interesting how the two competitors are like, meeting sort of the same sort of place. They're not the same prices. I think with Microsoft, you might spend a little bit more, but Microsoft does have, again, their product, their service is a little bit more full featured in terms of up and down the stack, not in terms of email to email, but in terms of like device management and so on. We'll talk about that. So
we have someone in chat also reminding us that if you want to add Google Voice, that's also an additional fee per user.
Yeah, and that's probably not as cheap. And that's the same story with Microsoft. And there it's because, like, at the end of the day, that 9 digits, that the telephone number itself, 10 digit number, like just comes with a cost that is like immutable, and so they basically have to pass that cost through. So you can get Google Voice, you can get, a business voice plan from Microsoft. In a lot of ways, these are very comparable platforms. It's interesting in that regard.
All right, so I think we're going to go to a little bit more interaction now. So I'm going to launch the next poll and see how people are feeling about Google. So do we have some evangelists here? So the first choice is Google. I just love it. I use it for everything. We have a second choice, Microsoft has my heart, or at least I'm used to it. Or number 3, not applicable because you didn't make Macs an option, which we do have a previous webinar about managing Macs at an organization level.
You can love Google and Macs, or you can love Microsoft and Macs.
That's true. So we will
not mutually exclusive. Let's see what people say.
All right, so let me give people another moment or two to answer their feelings on Google, and then I'm going to end the poll and share the results. Steve, would you mind?
Yeah, I don't mind reading at all. So there are 32% of the answers were that they love Google, and then 43% love Microsoft, or at least that's what they're used to, which is a nice caveat to add there, Carolyn, on this poll. So fair enough. It's not necessarily a Microsoft evangelist, but that's what they answered. And then a 25%, or just rounding up to 25%, say that it's not applicable, that neither of those two choices quite works for them.
Yeah. All right. I'm going to stop sharing. Thank you for helping us out with that. So we're going to pivot a little bit now to compare the way the two platforms work, how they approach typical tasks, or kind of their philosophy behind where they came from, and how that affects the way the platform works.
Right. So yeah, we already talked a little bit about the pricing and how the pricing is comparable. I think the story on this slide, well, there's a report here that the slide has a link to. And are you going to chat this as well, Carolyn?
Yes. Yep. I'll put that
out. So for those of you listening on the podcast, there's a report that Google, of course, is the one that offer you download this from a Google Workspace marketing page, and they sponsored the research. I'm sure it was real research, but obviously the intention was to find findings that looked good for Google Workspace compared to Microsoft 365. So take that for what it's worth. But I think that the take-home message is that this would be Community IT's perspective as well. I don't think I have anywhere else in the slide deck, so I might as well. I wasn't planning to, but let me just give a quick history. There was a period of time that I'm talking about, like maybe 2000, maybe even in the aughts, like 2008, 2009, 2010. I can't remember when it was, but where the precursor to what's now called Microsoft 365 and the precursor to what was now called Google Workspace were first released by these tech giants, and they were sort of email and SharePoint for Microsoft, but document storage and stuff, and calendaring and all that, and you have your own domain name, and it was kind of replacing all this stuff that was for a lot of places still happened on servers in their offices. And at that point, for the most part, we were probably telling our clients, you should go ahead and just keep a server in your office, because none of these products are really that mature, and it was depending on good internet access, which was not something you could count on at that time. And if the internet was down, then you couldn't get your email and all that kind of stuff that went with that. But if you were going to do it, we really felt like it was a flip of a coin. Like both were good. And they were pretty equally good. And so we had probably half of our clients at that time that were doing this going into what it was called. It wasn't called Workspace, and it wasn't called Google Apps at that point. I don't remember what it was called anymore, but half are going Google and half are going Microsoft. And within 3 to 4 years, it seemed like it was really the ones that had gone with the Google ones had made the wrong choice, because Google, which is an advertising company, really wasn't investing in their platform much. Microsoft, which was a software company, but really has pivoted pretty easily because its software and services are kind of one's like just an evolution of the other. They're still a customer facing, you pay us for a product, we make the product as best we can. That's their DNA. And they've been investing in Google, in Microsoft 365 or whatever the platform was called over the years, like, and iterating and making it better and better. And so I would say 3 or 4 years ago, if you asked me which was the best one, there would have been a no-brainer. Microsoft 365 is definitely the way to go. Workspace is a distant second. But somewhere along the way, and as part of it was the rebranding was an effect, not a cause. But the rebranding was part of a signaling that they're getting very serious about it. And they have really invested in Workspace in the last, I would say, 2 to 3 years. And it has really caught up. And at this point, they're both pretty good platforms. And we are comfortable with supporting nonprofits who are in either. Some characteristics of Workspace. It's very much browser-based and always was. And that's, and Google Chrome is a Google product. They don't need you to use Chrome, especially now that the Edge browser in Windows is basically Chrome with a different skin on top of it. But they are trying, they don't need you to be in Chrome, but they are a browser, like that's where they live. They have their web-based advertising, their web-based search, like everything from Google has always been in the browser. So that's where their services really work. And that makes it very lightweight. It has to be lightweight because it has to deliver over the internet live. So it's quick, it's lightweight, it's easy. Because it's a browser, there is no Windows partiality because a browser can be on a Mac or even a Linux computer. And as long as it has the plugins and stuff, it works fine. The search, hey, what is Google if not a search company? That's wonderful search. So it fits well into a best of breed stack. One thing that's interesting is, and this I think has more to do with the fact that it was a consumer product first than anything else. This bullet point about it being oriented towards the end user. We'll talk more about that when we get into some of the technical weeds about Google Drive and use Google Drive as an example of this. But the consumer was an end user or just a person, and that's where the products were like built for. They really sort of tacked on or added on like the administrative features, the management features, the sort of IT department features, if you will, afterwards, as they were adding to a consumer product to make it into a corporate or enterprise product. And that still, that sort of design evolution still shows through. Yeah, it has a strong presence in schools. So if you're in any kind of education setting, like if you're working with, if you like are a nonprofit that works in the education world, and a lot of the external stakeholders that you work with are teachers, they're going to want to share their curriculum that they write, and their lesson plans are going to probably be in Google Docs, or it could be, and they'll want to share them with you. And obviously, it works great when you're working with other Workspace users. I mean, it works wonderful. So. And there are a lot of other Workspace users out there.
That is totally true. Can you talk a little bit about Microsoft then? Are there
sure? And hey, what do you know? We have a slide about that. Yes,
there's a slide coming up right about it. Are there sometimes it's better to use Office 365 or where it does a better job?
Sure. Yeah. So Microsoft is not. Like Microsoft 365 is part of a larger stack for them, right? So who makes Windows? Microsoft does. Who makes the Office desktop suite? Microsoft does. And they also, Google also has their Google Cloud, but Microsoft has this whole Azure cloud thing where they put like, the fact that in the old days, Microsoft made all this server software and Microsoft SQL and all that. So they have lots of integrations between them. They are oriented towards the administrator. Their customers, especially in the old days, and so they have a whole sales department, oriented around selling to IT departments. They didn't sell to end users. They didn't convince the end user to use Microsoft 365. They convinced the IT department that Microsoft 365 was what you should use, and then the IT department rolled it out to everyone else. So they're much more oriented towards, administrative control, administrative insight. The fact that if you have a Windows computer, you can if you have a Windows computer, that's a modern computer, we would say, hey, you should probably have that computer associated, like joined is the term we would use, joined to Microsoft 365, so that you actually log into the computer with your email address and your Microsoft 365 password. And then your computer knows, oh, that's who this person is. So when you launch Outlook, like it already knows that who this person is. And if Outlook is being paid for with your Microsoft 365 license, it's already activated. And when you launch OneDrive, which is a Microsoft file storage place, like they already know who you are, and it's like, and that makes it seamless and easy. And if suddenly you're logging in from a different location, they can, the Microsoft security part of the stack can alert on that and all that kind of thing, and that's great. So especially if you're a Windows organization and not a Mac organization, but if you're a Windows organization, it can be advantageous to not have to do your own best of breed, but just go with Microsoft and let them do everything for you, because it's built pretty well. It may not be perfect at every layer of the stack, but it's definitely good enough. And the fact that you don't have to build the integrations or worry about those things, it's all done for you by Microsoft, makes it really well. I mean, I think also that's this question that you wrote for me on the slide, Carolyn, is the Office Desktop Suite the killer app, is a good one. Google's document editing, it integrates okay with the Office Desktop Suite. You can save a Word document to your Google Drive, no problem. But, if you save your Word document to a SharePoint site, then you can co-author your Word document with other people at the same time if they have Word, a modern version of Word on their computer. And that can be nice, so there are some advantages that Microsoft has by sort of owning, or at least being a big player in these different layers. But if you don't love Outlook, or if you don't love Windows because you all have Macs, then some of these advantages start to become less important.
Thank you for joining Community IT for this podcast, Part 1. Subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts and leave us a rating to help others find this leadership resource for nonprofits. Listen for Part 2 in your podcast feed. Community IT does these free webinars and podcasts for our community, and we love sharing our knowledge and experience. If you have more questions or are having trouble with your IT at your nonprofit, please get in touch with us on our website, www.communityit.com, so we can start a conversation or schedule an assessment. Downloading any of our free resources there will get you signed up for our webinar reminders, and you can attend our next webinar in real time and ask our experts your own questions. If you love podcasts, please subscribe and leave us a rating to help others find this leadership resource for nonprofits.